It's the Villain Show. Welcome to the Villain Show, everybody. Special Halloween edition of the Hero Show, starring the imposing John Hersey. That's not the imploding John Hersey, as his enemies would have it, but the imposing John Hersey and the irrepressible Andrew Bernstein. I am Andrew Bernstein, and you are indubitably John Hersey. How you doing this morning, the day before Halloween, John?
Oh, I'm good today. Woke up and it's snowing here and it looks beautiful outside, but we're getting buried and it just feels a little later than Halloween, doesn't it?
Yeah, we got a few in. I'm in the New York suburbs here. We got a few in on October 30th today, day before Halloween. We have several inches of global warming goodness dropping down on us. And I just want to go on record as saying, based on all the research I've done on climate change and the essays I've published on it, that climate change is overwhelmingly natural, only trivially man-made, that warming is good for life on Earth. It's the colder periods that are pernicious, and with the sun winding down towards the Dalton minimum, we are moving into a colder climate, John, and we are completely unprepared for it because of leftist environmentalist hysteria over warming. And we are talking today about the granddaddy of leftist philosophy and leftist ideology, and that, of course, is the German philosopher Karl Marx. I'm sure you have a good deal to say about his. There he is. There he is, the father of communism. He is an arch villain, without a doubt. I'm sure you have a good deal to tell us about his childhood and his life and everything, John.
Yeah, I don't think we could have picked a more arch villain to talk about for our celebration of Halloween here. Marx's ideas have morphed. I kind of think them like a cancer that have metastasized and morphed and taken root in all sorts of ways, and still affect us today. But yeah, Karl Marx, 1818 to 1883. He's known as obviously a journalist and a political theorist. Some call him a sociologist, an historian, and an economist. I think some of those terms are debatable. He was certainly a socialist revolutionary, most well known for his Communist Manifesto. I believe that was published in 1848, and his Das Kapital, 3 volumes of uh, nonsense, essentially, published between 1867 and 1883. He died, and of course his partner in crime, Frederick Engels, who we'll be talking about today as well, ensured that those saw the light of day, unfortunately.
Right.
What to say about him? Not much is known about his childhood. He was homeschooled by his father, Heinrich Marx, who many people describe as a classical liberal. Heinrich was he was an enthusiastic reader of Immanuel Kant, but he did advocate for constitutional reform in Prussia, and he was uh, homeschooling Karl Marx until he went off to the high school there in Trier, Prussia, today in Germany, but Trier, Prussia. And there as well, it's very interesting that Marx's high school teachers were classical liberals, and that, they're teaching the ideas of constitutional republicanism, and there was a crackdown, and the local conservative government replaced many of the teachers there with more conservative thinkers that would not be teaching and influencing students there with these, oh so terrible ideas about freedom and man's equality. So
those are
that gets us.
terrible ideas.
Oh, did my sarcasm didn't come through? Yeah, not
Yeah,
not
yeah,
terrible. Yeah. So
yeah. Although your sarcasm came through, John. You got a vivid personality. That's why everybody describes you as the imposing John Hersey.
imploding.
But not imploding. No, they're wrong. No, they're definitely wrong about that. But we know that interestingly, um, that on his mother's side, Marx came from a long line of distinguished rabbis. Oh yeah, the family. Yeah, we should mention the family were Jews, um, and his father was a lawyer, and his father converted to Protestantism at some point along the way. It was an adroit political move because as a lawyer in 19th century Germany, certainly there were more opportunities for you as a Protestant than there were as a Jew. But the family was very secular. Wasn't practicing religion. But Marx's mother, like I said, came from a long line of distinguished rabbis, and of course Karl, grows up to be one of the leading atheists. I just want to point out, as a complete philosophic aside, John, it has nothing whatever to do with Marx, but in the history of philosophy, the man who's generally regarded as the leading philosophic atheist is another German philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche. And Nietzsche's father was a Lutheran minister, and if I remember in his family tree, actually, both of his grandfathers were Lutheran ministers, and I think three of his four great grandfathers were Lutheran ministers. And so Marx's family comes out of a long line of rabbis. It's interesting. I don't know what it means, but it's just an interesting tidbit that these leading German atheist philosophers come out of religious families. I'm not sure what that means. Like I said.
Yeah, I know a few
Well,
people who
Marx,
have grown up in repressive religious backgrounds, and they rebel. And perhaps that has something to do with both Nietzsche and Marx being such devoted atheists.
I got to tell a story here, John, that I think everybody's going to get a kick out of. Lighten the mood here a little bit because we're dealing with villains on Halloween. So, Nietzsche died in 1900. He was 1844 to 1900. So I was a kid in New York, circa 1970, and I'm on the New York City subway. I think it was at the Broadway Lafayette stop. That famous line from Nietzsche, God is dead, Nietzsche. And underneath it, somebody else had spray painted, Nietzsche is dead, God. you know. So New York City, we get philosophic humor, it's, it was excellent,
Yeah, and
But anyway,
perhaps
anyway,
Nietzsche was only very able to learn that there's been this apparent resurgence of exorcisms and all sort of crazy. Yeah, Nietzsche is dead. The
yeah,
post-Nietzsche
yeah.
world.
This is true, and we should point out, Karl Marx gets a PhD in philosophy. His background is philosophy. There's some people who think he's an economist, and he's not. He's a philosopher. And you mentioned Das Kapital. Is an attempt to philosophically analyze the nature of capitalism and its inevitable destruction. And economists agree that it is overwhelmingly that it's philosophically work. I don't want to argue from authority, but I think the economists generally agree. Economists and wrote. We discussed him briefly when we had David Butler on. When we were discussing Adam Smith, but Skousen's book. What is it? The Making of Modern Economics. He's a big Adam Smith guy. But Skousen's chapter on Marx is titled "Marx Plunges Economics into a Dark Age," because there's just no understanding of how a market economy works in Das Kapital. So Marx is a philosopher. Everybody's not an economist.
He studied law, and he joined the group called the Young Hegelians. They criticized Hegel's metaphysics. Hegel was religious. Marx, as we said, was an atheist, and he adopted Hegel's dialectical method when they're at University of Berlin. And that says a lot, because his his method was not to look out at reality and to study actual economics. He did read, or we're told he read, uh, Adam Smith and David Ricardo and other economists. But you're
Mhm.
absolutely right. You can't actually get to truths in economics with a philosophic method that basically tells you not to look at reality, right?
Yeah, John. Yeah, fans of our show know my PhDs in philosophy, but having studied Hegel in graduate school, I mean, I can't honestly tell you that I understand Hegel, his 800 pages of his major work in metaphysics, the phenomenology of spirit. It's so dense, it's impenetrable. And I remember one of Ayn Rand's comments when she said, "Nobody's ever read Hegel. Lots of people may have looked at all the words on the page, but if reading involves some element of comprehension, nobody's ever read Hegel." That may be true. It is so dense. Um, so that's it's almost unintelligible. The one line I remember from the phenomenology of spirit that made sense to me was when Hegel says, at night all cows are black. It's okay. All right, I got something. I got something out of it. But yeah, the dialectical method is extremely complex to put it mildly. And you're right. It's Ayn Rand defined rationalism as deduction without reference to reality, was a brilliant definition. And Hegel is rationalism on steroids. It is just rationalism. It's so intense. So yeah, it all augurs poorly for Marx's understanding that this is the methodology that he steeps himself in. There's very little looking at reality for Marx. We should, Joe. We should point out a couple of things about Marx's philosophy. He's a philosophic materialist. That's important because today, when we say so and so is a materialist, people think, in an everyday sense or in an ethical sense, meaning materialism means that all they value is commodities. All they value is wealth and the physical goods that wealth can buy. A big house, a fancy car, and so on and so forth. But philosophic materialism is a theory of metaphysics. And one thing we can say for materialism is at least it's simple. Everything's matter. Everything is matter. Bang on the wall here, and when I'm in class or discussing materialism, I bang on the table, on the desk, everything is good, solid physical stuff. And right away we have a problem with that because materialism as a metaphysical theory, John, and everybody goes back to the Greeks. I mean, Democritus is considered the father of materialism. He was a contemporary of Socrates. So going back to the fourth and fifth centuries BC, and its enemies have long pointed out that materialism can't explain the human mind. That when we introspect, our thoughts and emotions are clearly not material objects, and even in the modern day, when the materialists say, well, thoughts and emotions is just neurons firing in the brain. But when we introspect, we don't detect neurons firing in the brain. We detect thoughts and emotions. And right away, Marx is off on a wrong philosophic foot. He's denying the existence of consciousness. He's denying the existence of the mind. And this is really, and we'll get into this as we go along, John. But this is really in my intro to philosophy class, which I could pat myself on the back, is pretty good. When I do Marx in the political philosophy section, we do in the political philosophy section at the end, we do Hobbes, Locke, Marx, and Ayn Rand. And I get to the end of the semester, I point out the real difference between Marx and Rand is not capitalism versus socialism. It's philosophic materialism and the denial of the mind versus the glorification of the human mind. Marx denies the existence of consciousness, and we're off on a very wrong philosophic foundation to start with, and it leads him inexorably, given the logic of his philosophy, to very, very faulty conclusions, very, very profoundly mistaken conclusions. When you deny not only the existence of the mind, but as Ayn Rand dramatizes brilliantly in Atlas Shrugged, you deny the existence of mankind's survival instrument. When you deny the existence of mankind's survival instrument, many fewer people are going to survive. And isn't that true of communism? Many fewer people will survive.
It also points to a really strange contradiction in Marx, which is that he thought that the only way for social change to come about was through this unfolding of history via class warfare, that all things were tied to material conditions and that ideas actually grew out of material conditions and didn't affect them, which leads one to ask, okay, then why is Marx spending his entire life writing about ideas, coming up with ideas, and trying to change the social program? Does he stand outside his system? Is he a direct refutation of his own ideas? I think he is. Um, you can't say that ideas have no impact, that all things come from matter, from material conditions, and that material conditions determine ideas, and then stand outside your system and give these ideas as some sort of revolutionary manifesto for changing material conditions. And you can see this in his conflicting actions throughout his life. At some points, he is calling for the guillotine and the end of property and for violent revolution. And at other times, he's counseling other socialists, hey, don't be a pest. You're gonna get this whole thing quashed if you go out into the streets and act violently. We need 50, 100 years of civil war before we can get to the material conditions for our communist revolution to actually manifest. So I just think this contradiction in Marx himself is really interesting, and I think it goes back to what you're saying about his materialist metaphysics.
Yeah, would materialists shouldn't be philosophers? I mean, what are they philosopher? What are they philosophizing with? You know, I but actually, I should reverse that, right? Philosophers shouldn't be materialists. Is the truth, because introspection is what evidence do we have that introspection is any faultier a method of cognition than extrospection? I mean, if we're going to go by direct awareness of reality, introspection, showing us thoughts and emotions, is just as real as extrospection, showing us, material objects. There's something that doesn't dial in right there, and if somebody denies what introspection shows us, it says neurons firing in the brain is the modern materialist view. I hate to do this, but it raises questions about the guy's honesty. I mean, how can that be honest? How can you deny the existence of thoughts and emotions when they're palpable, I guess palpable is not the right word, but they're immediately discernible to direct introspective awareness. So something's wrong there. All right, let's just content ourselves with saying, they're mistaken. But yeah, Marx. You read the Communist Manifesto, where he and Engels openly call for class warfare. This is the birth of the class struggle. And John and everybody, we would be remiss if we didn't point out that Black Lives Matter today in our day, is a Marxist terrorist organization. It's one. It's founded. What was her name? Patrice Cullors. She said, we and the other two women who founded BLM were trained Marxists, and which is true, they are. And they're openly call. I don't know if they still saying this. They might be hiding it, but the original information was, that they want to dissolve the Western style nuclear family. And it takes a village, right? It should be raised, communally. So, oh my God, God help the poor child who's raised communally. And by the way, I just want to point out here, what is this Western style nuclear family? So like people in Asia, and all over the world don't get married and have, and have families. It's ridiculous, even on the face of it. But Marxism is alive in the sense that vampires live. I can't say alive and well, but a lot, somehow still crawling around like intellectual viruses, causing severe harm. And it animates BLM, animates Antifa, right? You see the signs, these Antifa punks. Oh, no war but class war. And these Marxist terrorists, pushing us towards class war, race war, civil war. To them, it's all one. But I guess we could conclude with them about about Marx's influence. But class warfare, the class struggle, right? This is the essence of the Communist Manifesto. This is the essence of Marxism, and we should say something about it. So it's so pernicious, it's so deadly to human life. We should say something about the class struggle, John. And the class struggle here was not about you being tormented in your calculus class in high school. That's not the class struggle we're talking about here, right? Well, I should say me. You were probably a good math student. I struggled with the math classes in high school, but that's not the class struggle we're talking about, is it?
Not at all. No, I didn't do well with math either, Andy. But no.
All right. Well, we're two inveterate humanities guys, John.
Yeah, but yeah, I think class struggle is key to Marxism, and beneath that is this actual malice toward any sort of material prosperity. And this is another conundrum in Marxism, is that he's a materialist, but he's absolutely against the material conditions that create prosperity. His ideas promise a socialist utopia in which everyone has everything they want. They can work in the morning, fish in the afternoon, make love in the evening, drink wine, do whatever they want, whenever they want, with no.
I'll sign up for that.
And that's part of the enduring allure of Marxism, of course, is this promise that again and again has been shown to be absolutely false. In 1844, he wrote the Economic and Philosophic Manuscripts. And there is where he said, the enemy of being is having. And he shows this real revulsion, again, to material prosperity. And the book is thoroughly anti-reality, because men have to work and they have to specialize if they're going to live their lives and love their lives. I want to read one quote from the Economic and Philosophical Manuscripts, because I think it's really a window into Marx's hatred of the good. The less you eat, drink, and read books, the less you go to the theater, the dance hall, the public house, the less you think, love, theorize, sing, paint, fence, etc., the more you save, the greater becomes your treasure, which neither moths nor dust will devour. The less you are, the more you have. The less you express your own life, the greater is your alienated life. The greater is the store of your estranged being. There you have it. You can't get more clear than that. Give up on material prosperity. Give up on life. What do you make of that, Andy?
Oh, John, I'm an inveterate lecturer. I can say a lot about this, and I do every semester in class. So let me restrain myself here. Marx, PhD in philosophy, as we know, he's German. Goes to the German universities, right? Jena, Berlin, and the two leading lights of German philosophy, Immanuel, Kant, and G.W.F. Hegel. And Kant's dates were 1724 to 1804, and Hegel's dates were 1770 to 1831. And Marx, as you already pointed out, was 1818 to 1883. So John, they call Germany the land of poets and philosophers, and we don't want to knock German culture too much, because there's no field of intellectual endeavor where the Germans have not excelled. From A to Z, from archaeology to zoology, anything in between. In music and literature and the sciences and technology. German culture is one of the most advanced in the world. The land of poets and philosophers, but it's their philosophers that have been so bad. It's the philosophers that have caused so much trouble. So just to essentialize here, Kant is an enormously influential moral philosopher, as well as in underlying metaphysics and epistemology. And the essence of Kant's moral philosophy is that an action is virtuous only if it's utterly selfless. There can't be the slightest egoistic element to your action. Otherwise, that disqualifies it from the realm of virtue. So virtue lies in selfless service. You can summarize Kant's ethics in that line. Well, selfless service to whom? Kant doesn't specify. As long as it's not selfish, as long as it's not egoistic, the motive is pure. And the one area in Kant's philosophy that's lacking, why I think he's not at the same level as Plato and Aristotle, although he's certainly Kant's certainly a giant. One area that's missing is his political philosophy. He has nothing original to say in that field. Where, by contrast, Plato's a great political philosopher, even though I hate, he stands for totalitarianism. And Aristotle has a lot of interesting things to say about politics as well. Kant has nothing original to say in politics, but Hegel certainly does. Hegel is, certainly agrees with Kant that virtue lies in selfless service, and he specifies a beneficiary, loud and clear, with sacrificing for the state, the state with a capital S. I always, his work on political philosophy, the philosophy of right, Hegel. He's actually intelligible. You can actually read. I always joke, that if there was no uppercase, if there were no uppercase letters on Hegel's typewriter, his whole political philosophy would have collapsed. The state with a capital S, and he says in so many words. I don't remember the quote verbatim, but he says in so many words. John. A philosopher, grad school, you used to say that in order to understand a philosopher, you need to know who his philosophic enemies are. Now, that's a little negative. It's a little polemical, but there's some truth to that. Not only what the philosopher stands for, although that's the most important, but also who and what is he against. And Hegel's arguing against the Lockean, Jeffersonian politics of individual rights, the Anglo-American system of individual rights. And to Hegel, individuals have no rights. We only have obligations to the state. And he says in so many words, again, I don't remember the quote verbatim, but it's, if the state calls upon us to sacrifice our life, then that's the right thing to do. And that's not verbatim quote, but that's the essence of what he said. You go, what? If the state calls upon us to sacrifice our lives, then that's the right thing to do. Well, given that Hegel was enormously popular in Germany in his own lifetime, you can see where Germany, students are coming to, where did he teach at Jena, right? Students are coming from all over Deutschland to study with Herr Professor Hegel, and they're taking his ideas out into the culture as writers and teachers and professors and artists and journalists, and politicians and lawyers and stuff. Well, the idea of the state, first, foremost, and always, becomes dominant in German culture, leading to both National Socialism and, through Marx, to communism. So, just to complete the circle here, Kant says virtue lies in selfless service. Hegel adds to the state. They're both Christians, right? Kant's a Puritan. Hegel studied for the ministry, I think, as a Lutheran. And here's Marx, the philosophic materialist, and he's arguing, well, yes, selfless service to the state, and in a distinctively economic form, because as a materialist, when you get to the value, if you're a metaphysical materialist, you get to the value questions of philosophy. Well, what should we value? What should we not value? What should we go after? What should we shun? Well, what is it? I always ask my students: does it make sense to, if you're a materialist, to value salvation in a higher world? Well, no, that's mythical. Does it make sense to value wisdom, in the Aristotelian sense? No, that's just neurons fired in the brain. What's the big deal about that? If you're a consistent philosophic materialist, all you can value are material goods. That's all there is. And so where Marx is fascinating, he is most materialist in that sense. When you raise the question, who should get the material goods? Who should get the stuff? Most of them are egoists. They say, well, I should get it. But Marx is a Kantian. He's a Kantian altruist. And he's a Hegelian collectivist. As Marx answers the question, who should get the stuff? Other people. I have to sacrifice myself so that other people, especially society's poorest members, and the oppressed working class, that they get enough health care, they get enough food, they get, they get enough housing, and so on. So yes, Marx is a materialist, nothing but matter, and all that's important is matter, and the only thing we should go after is material goods. But he's a Kantian materialist. We should sacrifice ourselves for others, and others on the grand scale, the state. So you see the influence. He's John, intellectual historians have sometimes referred to Marx as materialism plus Christianity, but that's inaccurate. Aside from the fact that Marx would roll in his grave, if we said that, it's inaccurate. He's materialism plus Kant, or materialism plus Kant and Hegel, or materialism plus foundational German philosophy. That's really the essence of Karl Marx.
Yeah, and this collectivism,
Yes.
altruism leads to his most famous statement, I believe, from the critique of the Gotha program, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. And you're right, he was explicitly against America and the idea of freedom that America stood for. He said, superstition, injustice, privilege, oppression were to be superseded by eternal truth, eternal right, equality based on nature, and the inalienable rights of man. We know today that this kingdom of reason was nothing more than the idealized kingdom of the bourgeoisie, that this right was found its realization in bourgeoisie justice, that this equality reduced itself to bourgeois equality before the law. Equality before the law is not good enough. What he wants is egalitarianism, equal outcomes for all people. Freedom, the extent that it exists, freedom means the freedom of the capitalist to exploit the worker. And it just unleashes this desire for exploitative profits. We need to get rid of freedom, thought Marx. And I think another, certainly Marxist inspired philosopher, Max Weber, his work, the Protestant work ethic and the spirit of capitalism, attacks who other than one of the most profound seekers of freedom and material prosperity, Benjamin Franklin. There's a devoted anti-freedom strain in Marx. The entire thing from beginning to end is anti-freedom, but he's explicit about being against the American project and against the idea of rights. And we're seeing, like you said earlier, we're seeing this unfold before our very eyes. Marx, of course, Marxism was discredited with the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. People all over the world saw that this rot underneath the Marxist system led to nothing but death and destruction. But it didn't cause Marxism to go away. It went underground and it's resurfaced in various forms. And I'm sure we'll talk more about this. But that anti-Americanism is rampant today, and it's because the ghost of Karl Marx still lurks.
Yeah, John, 1989, you're talking about the Berlin Wall comes down and, communist tyrannies across Eastern and Central Europe collapse, mostly bloodlessly, the Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia and elsewhere, except in Romania, where it was bloody. But the joke, well, one of the jokes was back then, circa 1989, 1990, was the only place a Marxist professor can be hired is in the American universities. And, that's sadly true for us. The university's humanities programs are crawling with Marxists and people influenced by Marx and cultural Marxism today with critical race theory and the essence of it is always, one, see the world in terms of groups, not individuals. Individuals are enormously secondary, if at all, come up at all, in Marx and his intellectual heirs. And the groups are always, and here's the leitmotif of Marxism, they are always, without exception, divided into the oppressor and the oppressed. That social history is driven forward by some kind of struggle between an oppressed class and an oppressor class. And for Marx, it was economic. It was the owning class versus the working class. But his heirs in our day have added a distinctly racial element to today. Now it's not just the rich exploiting the poor, but it's the rich white people exploiting the poor non-whites. And I want to add, they've added what makes this especially terrifying, John, is they've added a national socialist element to their Marxist ideology, because the Marxists traditionally fought class war, whereas the Nazis who fought race war. And race war really has a dynamic to galvanize people in the gutter, and it's like Ayn Rand said, you could see your class enemies are a little harder to discern, but your race enemies, you could just see it. And you had this kind of seething, visceral hatred, and And the Marxist left today has incorporated a National Socialist race war element, integrated it thoroughly into their ideology. They've reversed the favored and disfavored races. Now it's not the whites who are superior. That is, they're morally inferior. It's white guilt. If you're born white, you're born with some moral stain. And one of the BLM, one of the Black Lives Matters founders, stated in so many words. I think the quote was, "Whiteness is psychosis." But anyway, that the Marxist theme, of the oppressor versus the oppressed as the driving force of history. Again, it's horrendous, but it's alive in the way viruses, are alive, and it completely dismisses individualism and individuality as as something that's good. John, we've on the Hero Show we've been discussing self-made men. Frederick Douglass, Benjamin Franklin, Alexander Hamilton as three great examples. And Frederick Douglass may be the best example for us because in a semi-free society, somebody who has that work ethic, they all emphasize work, right? Remember we were discussing that with Douglass and Franklin. Work. Yeah, work. That's the way. You have a strong work ethic in a free society, you can rise. That's reality. The self-made man, the Horatio Alger stories, people, who've risen, not just from rags to riches, but rags into middle class comfort. Is gazillions of it, and that's empirical reality. But but you're right. That's not Marx. We're not looking at empirical reality. We have our theory. History is driven forward by class struggle, and then so then we try to hammer the facts to try and get them to fit the theory, not design the theory around the facts. So Marx's theory is so out of touch, with reality. You point out to Marxists, like I've done many times. Look at all these people, who in a semi-free capitalist society have risen, from poverty into the middle class by honest work and productive effort, and all these immigrants, where they want to go, did the Soviets build a wall to keep them out? All these people want to immigrate to the communist system. No, bro. They built the wall to keep them in. These people want to go to the United States because they recognize that making $30,000 a year, just to arbitrarily quantify this, making $30,000 a year in a society where other people are millionaires is vastly preferable to making $3,000 a year in a society where other people are also making $3,000 a year. Prosperity, not equality, is what every man and every woman wants. Equality is what the Marxist intellectuals want, and it shows who's in touch with reality and who isn't. I mean, what's the good of being equally poor with everybody else? Is that so we don't envy them? So it's bad to make 10 times the income where other people in society are even wealthier than that. You see the envy. They would just hate. We gotta hate these people, who make more money than us, even though we're much more prosperous than we were under, communism. It's a sick, Marxism, John. It's a philosophy of, for, and by envy-ridden psychopaths who want to kill and destroy the people who are living well. Burn that bleep. I can't say the word on the air. Burn that bleep down. Marx says, burn it down. We're going to burn it down. That's, they're not struggling for the workers' state anymore. They want to destroy America. They want to bring it to its knees. That's Antifa. That's BLM. That's Marx's philosophy carried to its logical conclusion. I'm sorry. I can go on talking about this all day and monopolize the conversation. So I saw you have a lot to add to this, John.
Well, I think, what you're pointing to is the essence of Marxism is collectivism fused with victimhood. And the collective can change and it can morph, and it has. Today we have supposed racial collective, racial truth, class warfare. You can multiply these conflicts just ad nauseum. You could go on and on. And what's really funny is as opposed to capitalism as Marx was, Marx and Engels both lived off the backs of capitalists. And the few times that they experimented at all in their own lives with their own ideas, with actually living them, they didn't work. For a time, Marx and his wife tried communal living with his editor and his wife, and they didn't get along. They didn't like all being in this commune together, so that didn't work. They got rid of that. And what's really interesting is, Marx never really made much money. The most money he ever made, believe it or not, was working for the New York Herald Tribune as the European correspondent for a period of 10 plus years, and also for the New York Sun. But he didn't have enough money to support his family, and he didn't lift a finger to really improve his situation. He lived off the back of Engels's generosity. Engels was constantly giving him donations, and Engels lived off of his wealthy father, who was a tobacco merchant. And Marx also got loans from a rich grandfather, I believe it was, who was an industrialist as well. Marx, watched as several of his children died. Of course, this was more common back then, but a large part of it was brought about by this horrible diet that they were subjected to because they didn't have the money to go out and buy proper food. And this manifested, by the way, in Marx's own just absolutely horrifying health problems. By the end of his life, he was covered in boils, his armpits, around his scrotum. He was just dying from the inside out, smoking cheap cigars and hardly ever eating or sleeping. He, in large part, was a victim of his own ideas, and to the extent that he lived any sort of life, it was because he was living off of the effort and the wealth created by other people who were diametrically opposed to his ideas. His ideas were anti-life, and that manifested in his own life. It's just such a strong example of the ways that Marxism and Marx himself was wrong. And victimhood and collectivism are the root.
Right. So I want to add to that, and his materialist metaphysics, his materialist worldview. So I want to add something here. You look at look at the logic. I mean, irrationality often has its own internal logic. It's often internally consistent. That's what Ayn Rand calls rationalism. Deduction without reference to reality. So everything's matter. So then let's look at the logic here. Everything's matter. Well, then what does that make us? Well, we're bodies. We're nothing but bodies. And so when we apply this metaphysics to the questions of economic production that Marx is fascinated by, by what means do human beings create wealth? And the only answer congruent with that metaphysics is by manual labor, the work of our hands, the work of our bodies. That's what creates wealth. And so, Ayn Rand in effect raises the question: what about this? What about the human mind, Karl? Because he's talking about the factory workers on the assembly lines. Well, the steam engine that's driving the power looms in the textile factories. The steam engine was created by James Watt, and James Watt, Matthew Boulton perfected the Thomas Newcomen steam engine and mass produced it. Well, they did a lot of tinkering and everything, but I mean, James Watt is not a glorified tinkerer. He's a genius. He studied the properties of steam with Joseph Black, one of the leading chemists at during the Scottish Enlightenment. These guys, James Watt, and later on, actually, in near the end of Marx's own life, Thomas Edison, and people like that. The Wright brothers, I think Engels lived into the 20th century. The Wright brothers, were working on aeronautical engineering in the late 19th, turn of the 20th century. These guys are not, they're doing a lot of tinkering. These guys are not glorified tinkerers. They're geniuses. They're geniuses. And here, the human mind is the Industrial Revolution, the scientific, technological, and industrial revolution, is literally revolutionizing the world all around Marx. I mean, he's in Britain. He's lived most of his life in Britain, for God's sake. And he's a correspondent for the New York newspapers. Like you said, the mind is revolutionizing the world all around him. He can't see it. He's blinded to it by his own metaphysics. And so you look at the results of this. So, okay. So the mind doesn't play any role in this. Manual labor is what creates wealth. Well, we're essentially bodies. We're completely bodies. How do you get, we're animals. How do you get animals to work if they're recalcitrant? Well, you whip them, or you dig your spurs into their sides to get the horse, to run. You use physical coercion against them. And so, on Marx's principles, it's completely logical that you could combine your slave labor with industrial output, that you could create wealth with slave labor. And every communist society has used slave labor. The Soviets massively, the communists in China and North Korea as we speak. So it's the slave labor of the communist systems completely compatible with Marx's materialist metaphysics, and you see how it contrasts with Ayn Rand. If the mind is the source of creating wealth, intellectual and or material wealth, and the mind requires individual rights. The mind requires the principle of individual rights. These revolutionary thinkers overturn the dynamic. They overturn the theories of previous thinkers. They're looking at reality. They're thinking independently. They're speaking their mind. They're creating new ideas, new products. You could force them to do what you want. A dictator can force them to do what the dictator wants, but you're not going to get innovation that way. If the dictator disagrees with the new ideas, as they very often do, then you're going to squash the independent minds upon which all types of intellectual advance depends. Whether it's the church threatening Galileo for his new ideas, or the Soviets Stalin killing off the enemies of Lysenko, who denied the existence of genes. They always squash independent thinkers, the thinkers who go by reality, that not follow authority. It's always the case then that they descend into some kind of dark age. To put it simply, when you realize the mind is the source of all the wealth, material or intellectual, that human beings create, the mind requires freedom, requires individual rights, requires capitalism. But on Marx's metaphysics, if manual labor is what's the source of wealth, then you could combine the most egregious brute force and slavery and expect to achieve prosperity. So, Marx's theory is just flat out false and pernicious. It's as pernicious as National Socialism, and they've been around longer, so they've killed more innocent people. But the National Socialism and Communism, the two collectivist systems. You were talking about collectivism before, where the state takes precedence over the individual, and the individual, like Hegel said, has only obligations to the state, no rights. They're the two philosophic systems from hell. And this, and
between
and not just as, yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. No.
Oh, that's my last point. I was going to say, National Socialism is not around anymore, and communism is. But I quote myself. National Socialism is being revived by the Marxists in our day. Their race war component. They've simply reversed the favored and disfavored races. But they're racist. I mean, they're racist to the core. Everything is about race and class. It's this horror, John. They've combined the worst of National Socialism with the worst of Marxism into this horrific system, and that one goal and only one goal, and that's to bring the United States to its knees.
Yeah, you're talking about just the horrors perpetrated under Marxism between 1917 and 1989. We can't let this go. The effects of Marx's ideas really come into fruition, and under Marxist regimes, roughly 100 million people are killed by Marxist regimes between 1917 and 89, and millions more are tortured, starved, exiled, enslaved in concentration camps. And it becomes a crime in many of these places to hold certain views, to deviate at all from the norm. The idea is that you've got to have the one and only the one idea, and anything else, you're evil. You've got to be sent to the guillotine. So there could be nothing more evil than Marx and Marx's ideas, Marxism. And I think, the only way to really fight evil, we can't do it. It's Halloween tomorrow. We can't do it with holy water or silver bullets. The only thing that we need is to understand the true nature of evil and to condemn it with moral certitude. And if we do that, and if enough of us do that, and we encourage others to do that, then we can defeat evil. And it's something that we need to be doing now, because Marxism is it's being resuscitated. It's taking new forms. Postmodernism has given rise to dozens of academic disciplines, all falling, under the umbrella of critical studies, and all really preaching these ideas of collectivism and victimhood and anti-capitalism and anti-rights. And we don't want to see another Marxist regime come to power, because we already know what will happen. We've seen it again and again throughout history.
Yeah, you are absolutely right. That's one thing of many, in my judgment, that makes Trump less bad than the Democrats. Is he say no critical race theory in the training of federal employees. We're not going to. He identified that that's racism. So good for him. He's got a lot. Trump has his own set of problems, but I don't think they're as egregious as the Marxism of the of the left. But that's another story for another day. You're right. Marxism is the worst killer in human history. The Nazis may have equaled the body count if they had been around long enough, but they 20 to 22 million, according to innocent civilians murdered by the Nazis, according to Rudolf Rummel in his excellent book Death by Government. The communists, by conservative estimate in the Black Book of Communism, 100 million. Rummel estimates a lot more. You think the Black Book of Communism, based on partial research into Soviet archives, Putin shut that down. So we there's extensive, massive archives, KGB and GRU, and Soviet regime archives that Western researchers have never had a chance to look at, and with Putin in power, never will probably. Partial research shows 20 million. Professor Rummel, poli sci professor at the University of Hawaii till his death a few years ago, estimates in the Soviet Union alone 60 million, which I think is a more accurate estimate. So that the estimate of innocent civilians murdered by communist regimes worldwide would vastly exceed 100 million. They're the worst killers by anybody's arithmetic. They're anybody honest person's arithmetic. They're the worst killers of history. And there we have it. What did I say before? That Marxism is a philosophy of, for, and by psychopathic, envy-ridden psychopaths, intent on destroying those who live successfully, destroying those who live well. It is, I think, a vastly more evil philosophy even than religion, which is destructive enough. But Marxism, in German philosophy that underlies it, Kant, Hegel, and Marx, I think of them as the unholy triumvirate, John. This is the most destructive philosophy of history. And by the way, I'm going to write a book on the nature of evil in a few years. I wrote the book on the nature of heroes. Now I'm going to write a book on the nature of villains. They'll bookend each other. And I could give you the spoiler alert here that the collectivists are going to be branded as the most evil, the most egregious form of evil in human history. And Marx is a leading player of that, and he's a good villain for us to discuss on spooky villains, scary villains on Halloween, right? So now next week. Yeah, next week we're going to get back to heroes, everybody. The villain show. The villain show is once a year. So the other 51 weeks of the year we're going to focus on heroes. So but let's end on a positive, John. Ayn Rand grew up, in Russia, as we discussed recently. She was educated under the Soviets. Yeah, that's right. Last week, that's certainly recent. She was educated under the Soviets, and she provided the philosophic antidote that you were talking about. The you combat irrational ideas with rational ideas. You combat evil ideas with good life promoting ideas. And Ayn Rand gave us the philosophic ammunition to defeat these bad guys. So I guess we should call it a wrap. On that note, John, I wanna salute Ayn Rand and all the heroes of human history. There will be many more, and I wish you a very heroic day, John, and everybody else out there in Hero Land. Have a great Halloween,
Happy
everybody.
Halloween, everyone.